All right, so if you have a stiff upper back, especially if that tension bleeds up into your neck and or into your shoulders, please, please, please do not overlook this and get very good at what I'm about to show you. Most people just assume that they're good at it or assume that it's not that important and then they overlook it. Honestly, it's one of those things where it's like your hip. Everybody goes, oh yeah, it's basic that your hip is supposed to rotate. That makes sense. Oh, my hip doesn't rotate. I'm gonna work on it. And for whatever reason, we don't apply that to our upper backs. We know that it's basic knowledge that your shoulder blade is supposed to move around your rib cage. And yet, we also know that most people, or many people, do not have full movement of their shoulder blade on their rib cage. Their shoulder blades can't fully separate. For some people, they can't fully come together and they can't fully move up and down and around their rib cage like they're supposed to. For many people as well, they don't even have a surface to move their shoulder blade on, meaning their rib cage is so stiff that no matter how hard they try to move their shoulder blade, they just can't get full range of motion because their shoulder blade is this cupped bone that's made to live on this round surface, and they've lost that roundness in their rib cage, and their rib cage has become very flat and very rigid, and therefore their shoulder blades either popped off on certain angles, or you might see or hear of scapular winging and things like that. And or they can't fully move it around because it's not made to move on a really rigid, flat surface. So I'm going to show you how you can start to get your shoulder blade moving on your rib cage, but also I'm going to throw some little tiny concepts at you that most people totally overlook, and then when they go to do things like scapular cars or exercises that involve moving their shoulder blade on their rib cage and that are designed to maximize that, when overlooked, they physically can't maximize it. So like I said, pay attention to the details on this one. Now, many of you will know scapula cars, okay? Especially if you're not new to my channel, or especially if you're not new to Operation Human First, or you've been in Operation Human First. Scapula cars, most people think of, when people think of scapula cars, is either this or this. So people often see they've got their arms up and then they're moving their shoulder blades on their rib cage, or they've got their arms down here and they're moving their shoulder blades on their rib cage. And there are many, many, many other variations, but for most people, one of those two or both are going to pop up into their head. Yes, that's important. But with that being said, when you are moving your shoulder blades on your rib cage, like I said, the intent of a scapula car is to maximally move your shoulder blade in every single direction to capture as much length as we can and go through our end ranges of motion. If you're doing scapula cars and your sternum is pulled up like this, good luck, okay? You're not gonna get full range of motion, especially full protraction or full length in that tissue between your shoulder blades, which for many people when they're doing scapula cars, they're like, oh, my upper back is so tight. And they're trying to get length there, yet they're trying to move their shoulder blades with their rib cage cranked up into end range extension, and they physically can't because, like I said, your shoulder blade's not made to move on a super extended surface. Our natural curvature of our spine includes about 30 to 40 degrees of flexion of the rib cage, so curving this way. That is actually technically neutral or zero. So if you have less than 30 to 40 degrees of flexion, and let's say you have 10 to 20, you're technically extended, and your shoulder blade's not made to move super well on that type of surface. So keep that in mind when you're doing scapula cars. So not only when you're doing things like scapula cars or trying to fully move your shoulder blades on your rib cage, not only do you want to make sure you're not cranking your sternum up towards the ceiling, which some people are just doing all day, every day, and not even realizing it, especially if they have a history of dance or ballet or being in the military or they're a police officer. Those are common populations because they have to be like this all the time. Or you've just had somebody in your ear, like I did growing up, that was constantly like, pull your chest up, squeeze your shoulder blades back, because that's what you're supposed to do. I'm gonna politely disagree because it causes a lot of problems if we're just cranking ourselves to end range and then living there. Now, the way that you can correct that, if you're just doing basic scapula cars, is just, yeah, when you do it, not only just make sure that you're not cranking up, give me a little exhale and let your sternum fall. Don't crank it down on me and end up way down here and just swing that pendulum all the way the other way, but just let it fall. And then go through your scapulars and see if you can do it without changing the angle of your sternum, okay? And especially without that angle pointing up at the ceiling. You're gonna notice a difference in how far you can move your shoulder blade on your rib cage. You can then take that one step further. For many people, they can do scapula cars here. They conceptually get it. And they get it down here. They're like, okay, yeah, I get the idea. We're going up and back and down and forward, and then we're throwing it in reverse and going the other way. But as soon as we have them put their hands on the ground and try to replicate that, I bet like 20 to 50% of you watching this video have nailed this, and then you try this next variation and you get totally lost. Okay? It's not uncommon. But again, it's a basic thing that you should be able to do. So if you can't, please start practicing this. So what we're gonna do, we're just gonna place our hands on the ground. You're gonna come into all fours and you're gonna try and see, okay, how far can I move my shoulder blades on my rib cage in each and every direction? So just like when your arms are up, what we'll do here is you separate your shoulder blades as much as you can. You can glide them up towards your ears. You can then try to bring your shoulder blades together. You can slide them down towards your hips, and then you can press them apart again. And you're basically just trying to paint the biggest circle that you can with your shoulder blades on your rib cage, and then you'd of course throw it in reverse, and you'd go the other way. Now, if once again, when you get down here, your natural tendency is to try and move your shoulder blades here, or your sternum ends up cranked up and you go into full spine extension on me, you're gonna notice that your shoulder blades don't move nearly as far as if you were to give yourself a more rounded surface, or somewhere in and around neutral, or in and around 30 to 40 degrees of flexion, which really, if you're having trouble conceptualizing, you're watching this and you're like, yeah, but Alex, what does that look like? How do I do that without doing a cat-cow? Which you're also not trying to do. We're not trying to do your scapulars here. All you need to do is once you get into this position, once again, exhale, but this time instead of letting your sternum fall down, what you're gonna do is try to think of your whole rib cage, which right now is horizontal. Exhale and try and float your rib cage up towards the ceiling. Okay? If you can just get your rib cage to come up, you don't even have to change the tilt. So what I mean is I don't have to tilt my rib cage down or tilt it up. I'm just gonna try and shift my whole rib cage up towards the ceiling, and then give myself a good little exhale as I do that. Now, I'm just gonna take note of my sternum position, or my chest bone, my breastbone, and I'm just gonna go through my scapulars and see, as I go through my scapulars, can I have minimal change in that chest bone such that I'm not cranking it down and not cranking it up. I'm just kind of keeping it as is as I go through those same movements. And then I'm going to throw it in reverse and go back the other way. So you're going through, fully pulling your shoulder blades together, but making sure that as you do so, you don't end up here, right? You just glide your shoulder blades together on your rib cage, then you slide them down, then you press them apart, then you slide them up, bring them back together, slide them down, press them apart, and you want to be able to go both ways. So you can then bring them back together, slide them up towards your ears, press them apart, and go through those same motions. Like I said before though, many people, when you just get your hands on the floor, suddenly you know everything, you know those movements so well, and you can go through it here no problem. But when you plant your hand and try to replicate that same motion, you might feel totally lost and you might suddenly kind of forget what you're doing. That just means that your brain's awareness of your shoulder blade and rib cage in space needs some work. So you need to induce a little bit of what we call cortical mapping, which is basically just familiarizing your brain with your shoulder blade and with your rib cage and what movement there is like. Because when your arms are up, your brain gets it and it clicks, but when your arms are down, it doesn't. Just practice, okay? Take your time with it. Think yourself through the motions. You can practice. Sometimes it's really helpful to just prime it with your arms up and go, okay, yeah, Here's the motions. I feel my shoulder blades moving. They're coming together. They're gliding up. They're separating. They're coming back down. Now I'm going to immediately put my hands on the ground and try and replicate that. Take your time with it and then practice going in both ways. But then also, like I said, do not overlook this. Because if your intent with scapular cars or with your activity is to move your shoulder blades fully on your rib cage and get a good stretch or get good length in that tissue between your shoulder blades, that's really hard to do with your rib cage cranked up. Let it fall down. Give yourself back that natural surface that your shoulder blades are made to move well on, and then go through it and see if you can maintain that without ending up back here, and then try to replicate that on all fours. And once you get it, you're going to notice like, oh yeah, this feels really good to actually have my shoulder blades fully moving on my rib cage again. Your brain and your nervous system will love that feeling, especially if you're really locked up back there. And if you find that as you go through these exercises that, you know, it's really hard for me not to pull my sternum up into that position or not to fall back into extension as I'm going through this, that might be one of the things that's actually feeding into your upper back, neck, shoulder tension. So it's good for you to become aware of that and to start practicing not doing it and to reestablish motion that you've lost by cranking it up all the time. So like I said, don't overlook scap cars, period, but also really look at how you're doing to ask yourself the question, am I getting a return on investment here? Am I getting what I should be getting out of these? Am I truly getting maximal motion? Or when I'm going through it, am I limiting maximal motion by actually pulling my sternum up and cranking myself into end range extension? And can I get a little bit more out of this exercise by not doing that? Build some awareness around that and get good at not doing it and get good at fully moving my shoulder blades. And then can I challenge myself and replicate that on all fours? Because you should be able to move your shoulder blades on your rib cage with your hands planted. And that sensation that we get by being able to push into the ground feels really, really nice. And like I said, your nervous system will love it, especially if you've been lacking motion back there as a whole. If you guys have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out. You could leave them in the comment section below. Otherwise, thank you for being here, and I hope that was helpful.